Hello, listeners. If you can hear and see this, it means you're breathing and you're alive. Well done. If you're new here, consider subscribing. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. The whole thing started with a misplaced shoe, just one of my old sneakers that I could have sworn I left by the back door turning up in the linen closet. Tucked neatly behind the stack of towels, I shrugged it off, blamed my own tiredness. Life with a 5-year-old is a constant blur of misplaced sippy cups and lost action figures. So a wandering shoe didn't even register as strange, not then. My son Leo had always been a quiet kid, thoughtful in a way that made him seem older, with big serious eyes that took in everything. He started talking about his new friend a few weeks after his 5th birthday. He called him Shadow Boy. At first it was charming. He'd set an extra place at his little table for tea parties, carefully pouring imaginary tea into a second empty cup. He'd chat away to the empty space beside him, his conversations a mix of preschool gossip about who got the red crayon and quieter, more serious murmurs I couldn't quite catch. I asked him what Shadow Boy looked like, and Leo just pointed at the wall where the afternoon sun stretched his own silhouette long and thin, like that. But he can move. He said it so matter-of-factly that I just nodded and said that sounded like a fun friend, the first real chill, the first genuine sense of something being not right. Came on a Tuesday. I was making lunch. Leo was in the living room. I heard him giggle, a high, pure sound, and then he said, "Shadow Boy, that's Daddy's. You can't have that." I poked my head in. Leo was sitting on the floor, his back to me, looking at the blank television screen. The remote control was on the coffee table, right where I'd left it. Nothing seemed amiss. I asked him what he meant. He turned, those big eyes wide and clear. He said Shadow Boy likes the shiny buttons. He wants to play with the clicker. I told him that was fine, but we had to ask first. I went back to the sandwiches. A minute later, the television blared to life at full volume. A jarring blast of cartoon noise that made me jump. I hurried back in. The remote was gone from the coffee table. I found it on the floor beneath the window. Across the room, the batteries were out, scattered around it like little metallic teeth. Leo was still in the same spot, his small hands now covering his ears. I asked if he did that. He shook his head. Shadow Boy got mad because I said no. He doesn't like being told no. I tried to laugh it off. A weird coincidence. Maybe the remote was faulty. Maybe Leo, in a fit of pique he didn't want to admit to, had thrown it. But he wasn't a liar, and the look on his face was one of confused fear, not guilt. That was the beginning of the rules. They came out in bits and pieces through Leo's casual comments. I started writing them down on the back of an old envelope. Not because I believed, but because it felt like a game. A way to engage with my son's rich imagination. Rule 1, don't tell Shadow Boy no. Rule 2, if you hear whispering in the heating vent after dark, hum a song until it stops. Rule 3, always close the closet door and Leo's room all the way. You should hear the click. Rule 4, Shadow Boy doesn't like mirrors facing the bed. Keep them covered. Rule 5, if your reflection does something you didn't do, leave the room immediately and don't look back. I wrote that last one down with a real unease settling in my gut. That was too specific, too odd for a 5-year-old to concoct. The moving things escalated. It was never dramatic, never furniture sliding across the floor. It was small, intimate violations. My wedding ring, which I never took off, would be missing, and I'd find it in the freezer, resting on top of the ice cream carton. The book I was reading would lose its bookmark, and I'd discover it weeks later pressed between the pages of a photo album, marking a picture of me as a child. In every photo, my face was carefully scratched out with something fine and sharp. Leo's favorite toy truck, a red fire engine, began to appear in the bathroom sink, sometimes dry, sometimes filled with a few inches of cold, murky water. Leo would just retrieve it, dry it off, and whisper, "It's okay." He just likes playing with it. He doesn't mean to get it wet. I started to see things from the corner of my eye. Not a figure, but movement, a suggestion of deeper darkness shifting within a shadow, the way a pile of coats on a hook might. For a second, look like a hunched person. I'd spin, and it would be just coats, just shadows. The air in the house grew heavier. Especially in the evening, it felt still and watchful. Leo changed. His cheerful chats with his friend became more one-sided. He'd listen intently, his head cocked, then nod slowly. Okay, he would say, his voice small. Sometimes he'd argue in a pleading whisper. Please don't, that's Mama's. But the arguments seemed to be losing. He became jumpy, clinging to my leg when we moved from room to room after sunset. He stopped playing in his room alone. The worst was the night I broke a rule. I was exhausted. Leo was finally asleep, and I just wanted a long shower. I went to the bathroom and saw the small hand mirror on the counter was angled in such a way that it reflected Leo's bed through the open door. I remembered Rule 4, but I was so tired, I rationalized it. It's just for a few minutes. I turned on the shower, the steam fogged the mirror, and when I got out, wiping a clear streak to see my face, I saw something else in the reflection behind me. The hallway was dark, but in the glass, it looked darker still. A pool of ink, and within it, for less than a heartbeat, were 2 points of dull, gray light, like stones seen at the bottom of a deep well. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Rule 5 flashed in my mind. If your reflection does something you didn't do, leave the room immediately and don't look back. But my reflection was my own, terrified, mouth open in a silent scream. It was the lights behind me that were wrong. I broke the rule. I looked back. I spun around so fast I slipped on the wet tile, catching myself on the doorframe. The hallway was empty, just dark, but the darkness felt solid, resentful, like I had caught it in the act of becoming something else, and it had snapped back into shape. From that night on, the activity changed. It became less about moving objects and more about presentation. I'd wake up, and all the cupboard doors in the kitchen would be standing open, just a crack, every single one. I'd close them, and an hour later, they'd be open again, the drawers, too. Leo would come downstairs, see it, and his little shoulders would slump. He's looking for something. He'd say, I asked, what is he looking for? Leo wouldn't answer, just shook his head. One morning, I found all the family photos in the living room turned face down. Every last one. The glass cold to the touch. I flipped them back up, my hands trembling. That afternoon, they were all turned to the wall. The next rule came then, whispered by Leo as he colored at the table. His crayon moving in frantic, dark strokes. He doesn't like being looked at in pictures. He wants to be the only one you see. I started sleeping poorly. I'd wake up with a jolt, convinced someone had just spoken my name right into my ear. The house was never silent anymore. There was always a sound, the subtle creak of a floorboard, settling in a room I knew was empty. A faint skittering in the walls that was too rhythmic for mice. Like something dragging very light fingers over the drywall. I bought cameras, little indoor security ones. I set one up in the living room, and one in the hallway facing Leo's door. The first night of recordings was mundane. Hours of empty rooms, me walking to the bathroom, Leo sleeping peacefully. The second night, the living room camera showed the couch at 3:17 a.m., the throw pillow depressed, as if someone had just sat down on it. It stayed that way for 20 minutes, then slowly reinflated. No one was there. The hallway camera showed Leo's door. At the same time, the door now turned, slowly, completely, then turned back. The door did not open. I watched the footage over and over, my blood turning to ice. I showed it to Leo. Carefully, I asked if Shadow Boy did that. He looked at the screen, then at his door, and he started to cry, a quiet, hopeless sound. He's mad at the doors. He said between sobs, he says they keep him out, but they also keep him in. I didn't understand. I was fraying at the edges, jumping at my own shadow, which now seemed too long, too connected to my feet. I began to notice a smell, a faint, dry odor like old paper and cold soil. It would come and go, strongest in Leo's closet. Even though I kept it religiously closed, I took everything out, searched for a dead mouse, a leak, nothing. Just that persistent, empty smell. The final descent began with the whispers. Leo started talking in his sleep, not his own voice, but a flat, monotonous recitation. He'd list things: silverware, photographs, batteries, keys, hair. One night, I stood outside his door, listening to that small, calm voice list items in the dark. It felt like an inventory, a shopping list for something vile. I pushed the door open. The room was moonlit. Leo was asleep, his chest rising and falling evenly, but his lips were moving, forming the words: scissors, glass, ashes. I rushed to his bed, shook him gently. Leo, wake up. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, confused. Mama, Shadow Boy says we're running out of time. He needs a place. The next day, Leo was not himself. He was lethargic, his skin pale. He spent hours just staring at the wall where his shadow fell, nodding occasionally. I decided enough was enough. This was no longer an imaginary friend. This was a nightmare harming my child. I made an appointment with a child therapist. I started researching. I found stories online, similar accounts, always ending abruptly, the users gone. Their last posts frantic. I bought sage. I sprinkled salt along the windowsills. A friend suggested it. I felt foolish, but I was desperate. That night, the house reacted. The temperature dropped, a deep, localized cold that clung to the hallway. The whispering in the heating vent became not a whisper, but a hiss, a static-y, hateful sound that seemed to form words just below comprehension. I hummed, as the rule said. I hummed a lullaby my mother used to sing, my voice shaking. The hissing grew louder, more aggressive, until it suddenly cut off. The silence that followed was worse, thick, and expectant. I went to check on Leo. He was awake, sitting up in bed, staring at his closet door, which was open a precise 2 inches. Mama, he said, his voice terribly calm. He says the salt is mean. He says you have to take it away, or he'll take me into the closet where it's always dark, and you won't find the door. My heart stopped. No, I said. The word ripped from me. Defiant, I scooped Leo up. I was leaving. We would go to a hotel. Right then, I carried him into my room, set him on my bed, told him to put his shoes on. I turned to grab my car keys from the dresser, and I saw it. In the mirror above the dresser, my reflection was right. But behind me, on my bed, where Leo was sitting, the reflection showed not Leo, but a stretched, thin shape, a boy made of solidified darkness, sitting right beside him, its long-fingered hand resting on Leo's shoulder. Leo in the reflection was looking at it, not at me, his face blank. I froze. Rule 5 screamed in my head. But this was my son. I whirled around. Leo was alone on the bed, struggling with his sneaker. He looked up. Mama, are you okay? Your face is white. I couldn't speak. I just grabbed him and the keys and ran. We stayed in a bright, generic hotel room that night. Leo slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The silence was a blessing. No whispers, no creaks, just the hum of the air conditioner. I thought we had escaped. I was wrong. We were just bringing it with us. The next morning, Leo was coloring with hotel stationery. He looked up and said, "Shadow Boy says he likes it here. It's new. He's tired of the old house. He wants to stay with us. He says he's my brother now. And brothers share everything." I felt the world tilt. It wasn't attached to the house. It was attached to Leo. We went home because we had nowhere else to go. The house felt different. Not angry, but satisfied, like it had been waiting and we had confirmed something. Things moved less, but the cold spot in the hallway was permanent now. A patch of winter you had to walk through to get to Leo's room. The smell of old paper was stronger. One evening, Leo said the last rule. He was playing, and he said it like he was reciting the alphabet. "Mama, Shadow Boy says the last rule is you have to choose." I knelt beside him. "Choose what, sweetie?" He looked at me, and for a moment his eyes were not his own. They were ancient and sad. He says a house needs a boy. He says he's been waiting a long time in the dark, and he's so lonely. He says you can keep me, but then he stays too, forever, or he takes me, and he goes away, and you can be alone, but you have to choose before the new moon. My blood went cold. This was no longer a creepy story. This was ultimatum. I refused to choose. I fought. I called every expert I could find, priests, mediums, paranormal investigators. Most thought I was crazy. One came, a woman with tired eyes. She walked through the house, felt the cold spot, saw the way Leo watched the walls. She told me she couldn't help. She said, "It's not a ghost. It's something older. A vacancy that wants to be filled. It's made a claim." She left, and I was alone with the impossible choice. The night before the new moon, the house was preternaturally still. Leo went to bed early, exhausted. I sat in the living room in the dark, waiting. I must have dozed, because I was jolted awake by a sound. A clear, distinct sound of a drawer opening in the kitchen, not being slammed, but being opened with purpose. I got up, my legs weak. I walked to the kitchen doorway. All the drawers were shut, but on the otherwise empty kitchen table sat a single sharp kitchen knife, pointing directly at Leo's room, and beside it, one of Leo's small socks. It was a message, a brutal, clear one. The choice. I started crying, silent, heaving sobs of utter defeat. I took the knife. I put it away. I picked up the sock, and I walked to Leo's room. I pushed the door open. The nightlight was out. The room was pitch black, blacker than it should have been. The light from the hall didn't penetrate. It stopped at the threshold like a solid wall. "Leo," I whispered. I heard a rustle from the bed. "Mama, I'm here." His voice was faint, far away. I stepped into the darkness. It was like walking into cold water. The air was thick and resistant. I could barely see the outline of his bed. I stumbled forward, my hand reaching out. I found his small form. I pulled him to me. He was freezing. I turned to carry him out, to run, but the door was gone. Where the rectangle of hall light should have been was just more black wall. Panic seized me. I held Leo tight. "I'm here. I'm here," I chanted. I closed my eyes, thinking if I couldn't see it, it might break the spell. When I opened them, a faint gray light was seeping into the room, not from a door, but from the closet. The door was wide open. Inside was not a closet, but a long, narrow hallway receding into impossible distance. The walls were made of shifting, liquid shadow, and at the very end, a tiny, gray pinprick of light. Standing in the threshold of the closet was a shape, the silhouette of a boy, but all wrong, too tall, too thin, its head slightly too large. It didn't move. It just waited. I felt Leo stir in my arms. He looked toward the shape, and he didn't scream. He just sighed, a sound of terrible resignation. "It's time to choose, Mama," he said. The thing in the closet extended a long, dark arm, not toward me, but toward Leo. Its fingers were too many, and they twitched like spider legs. The silence after my refusal was not a silence at all, but a vacuum. A sudden, total absence of sound that was more violent than any noise. It sucked the air from my lungs and pressed in on my eardrums. The room plunged into a cold so deep and sudden it felt like a physical blow. A wall of Arctic air that slammed into us. Leo's small body against mine went rigid, a tiny statue of fear. The shape in the closet doorway did not move toward us. It twitched, a violent, jarring spasm that made its entire elongated silhouette blur and stutter like a broken film. The impossible hallway behind it reacted, the walls of shifting shadow seeming to boil and recoil. The distant gray pinprick of light at the end flickered wildly, as if whatever was back there was furious, or perhaps afraid. A soundless scream of pure rage filled the space. It was not heard but felt, a high-frequency vibration in the teeth, a pressure that built inside my skull, a psychic static that scraped at the edges of my thoughts, trying to find a way in, to drown out my own voice with its wordless fury. Leo whimpered, a desperate, animal sound, and buried his face into the hollow of my neck, his cold little nose pressing against my skin. I held him tighter, my arms locked around him, anchoring us both in that sea of hostile dark. I said it again, the word, a talisman, a weapon. No. This time, it was less a whip crack and more a grunt of effort. Pushed out against the immense pressure trying to silence me, the shape blurred further, its edges bleeding into the surrounding darkness. It was becoming less a thing and more an idea of a thing, a memory of a silhouette. The hallway behind it began to collapse, not with a crash, but with a sickening visual slurp, the distant walls folding in on themselves, the perspective shortening, as if the darkness itself was consuming the tunnel. The gray light winked out, not fading, but vanishing as if a door had been shut far, far away. The cold began to recede, but not like normal warmth returning. It retreated from the corners of the room first, slithering back like a living thing, pulling away from the walls and the ceiling. The deep freeze around us lessened by degrees, each exhale of mine no longer forming a frantic cloud. The shadow boy was not disappearing in a puff of smoke. It was unraveling its substance, if it ever had any, dissipating, fraying at the seams, and melting into the ordinary, harmless shadows cast by the faint light now seeping from the hall. The two dull gray points of light that were its eyes remained the longest, fixed on me. They held no hate, which was somehow worse. Hate I could understand. Hate was a passion, a fire. What I saw in those flat, stone-colored discs was a profound, chilling disappointment. The look of a child whose one chance at a gift has been cruelly snatched away and broken before his eyes. It was a look that suggested I had failed a test of cosmic importance, that I had chosen the small, safe love of one over a terrible, vast belonging. And then those lights too dimmed, faded, and were gone, not extinguished, but absorbed back into the nothing from which they came. The ordinary hall light suddenly rushed into the room as if a barrier had fallen, bright, yellow, and blessedly mundane. It was so shocking after the absolute black that I flinched. I stumbled backward, my legs numb and clumsy, clutching Leo, who was now a dead weight of exhaustion and shock in my arms. The bedroom door was right behind me. Open, I had not heard it open. I fell through it. Not walking but collapsing out of that room and into the safe, solid reality of the hallway. The worn carpet under my knees, the faint smell of dinner still in the air. I reached back with a foot, hooked the door, and slammed it shut with a force that shook the wall. The click of the latch was the sweetest sound I had ever heard, a definitive, mechanical sound that sealed that other place away. We did not go back in that night. We slept on the couch, or rather, I lay on the couch with Leo sprawled on top of me. Every light in the house blazing, the overheads, the lamps, even the stove light in the kitchen. I needed the electric hum, the proof of wires and bulbs and normalcy. Leo slept a deep, motionless sleep, the sleep of utter depletion. I did not sleep at all. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the house. It was silent. But now the silence was just silence, empty and clean, not the watchful, pregnant hush that had plagued us for weeks. When dawn came, a real, proper dawn that turned the windows pink then gold, I carried Leo back to his room, my heart a hammer in my throat. I opened the door slowly. The room was just a room, bathed in gentle morning light. His toys were where he left them. His blanket was rumpled on the bed. The closet door was shut. I laid him down. He stirred, murmured something, and went back to sleep. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. The cold spot in the hallway was gone. The air was uniform, neutral. The dry, papery smell had vanished, replaced by the scent of dust and sunlight. Over the next few days, the house behaved itself. Doors stayed shut. Drawers remained closed. Nothing moved. The remote stayed on the coffee table. Leo was quiet. Withdrawn, he played, but listlessly, he ate. He watched cartoons, but the lively spark in him was dim. It was as if he was recovering from a long illness. Slowly, like a plant turning toward the sun, he began to return to himself. His laughter came back. First, a small chuckle, then his full, belly-deep giggle. He never mentioned Shadow Boy, not once, when I, about a week later, cautiously asked if he missed playing with his old friend. He looked at me with genuine puzzlement. "What friend, Mama?" he asked, his eyes clear and untroubled. He didn't remember. The amnesia was a blessing and a curse, a blessing for him, a curse for me, because it meant I carried the knowledge alone. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. Because I did choose, I chose the third option it never offered, the option of defiance, to deny its premise, its reality, its very right to exist in our world. And it worked, or seems to have worked. But things are not exactly as they were. The easy comfort we had in our home is gone, replaced by a careful, unspoken vigilance. Leo is afraid of the dark again. A normal childhood fear, but it is intense. He needs a nightlight now. A plug-in one that glows a soft blue, and sometimes, when I tuck him in, he'll clutch my hand and ask, in a very small voice, "Mama, can you check the closet? Not just look, but check. I need to know it ends." I do it, every single time. I walk across the room. I pull the door open with a firm tug, and I step inside. I let my fingers brush the back wall. The cool, dry drywall. I knock on it. A solid thump-thump. I say, "See, all the way back. Just your clothes." He watches, his eyes huge in the dim light. And he nods, satisfied for the night. But the other day, I was putting away his laundry. The afternoon sun was streaming in, long golden beams full of dancing dust motes. The room was warm and peaceful. I finished, turned to leave. And I saw our shadows on the far wall. Mine, a tall, amorphous blob, and Leo's, smaller, beside mine where he was playing on the floor. They stretched toward the door, elongated and faint, but between them, for just a fraction of a second, I saw a third, a thin, spindly line of deeper darkness, connecting my shadow's hand to Leo's shadow's head. Like a tether or a bridge, it was there. And then it wasn't, gone when I blinked. My breath caught. I stood frozen. I told myself it was a trick of the light. The way two separate shadows can sometimes merge in the middle. A trick of my tired eyes, my haunted mind. I have to believe that. I have to. Because the alternative, that my defiance did not banish it, but only changed the terms. That the connection was not severed, but forced into a subtler, deeper form, is unthinkable. The rules are gone. Leo doesn't recite them. They aren't enforced by shifting cold or moving objects. But I find myself still following them. I close every door, all the way until I hear the confirming click. I keep the mirrors in our bedrooms angled away from the beds, covered sometimes with a cloth. When the house is too quiet at night, and my mind starts its own whispers, I hum. I hum that same lullaby, a low, tuneless vibration in my chest. And most of all, I am careful with that word. The word that saved us. I never, ever say no out loud in the empty house anymore. Not to the silence, not to the dark. If I feel the need to deny the unseen, I just think it. I shape it with my tongue behind my teeth, and push it out with my mind, very, very hard, a silent shout into the void, just in case something is still listening.